But let's start off with that main event from UFC 305 because Dricus du Plessis is the new champion, but like some new champions in the past, he won the belt in somewhat controversial manner.
Right.
He beat Sean Strickland in a very close decision, a decision in which a lot of people thought Sean Strickland won. Now, if you had Dricus winning, that's not an outlandish, thing to have. It wasn't a robbery either way you look at it, but he was looking for that cemented, this is my signature victory as the champion at 185 and a finish over one of the top two best 185ers of all time in Israel Adesanya, and a submission at that, Izzy had never been submitted in his career before, really does stamp his claim as he is the guy at 185 right now. So I want to get your thoughts on the fight. I have a lot to unpack as well. I think some of those striking exchanges were really interesting, the way Dricus used his grappling and his tenaciousness. But what are your thoughts, and where do you see Dricus going from here? Is it the Sean Strickland fight next?
I love the fight. When you look at the top of the division, I'll only touch on this for a second. It makes the most sense for Sean to be next. Dana had said that he was next regardless of who won. And it made sense. He had beaten Israel Adesanya, and then Izzy never got his get back on that. And then the DDP fight was very controversial, so everybody wants to see that one take place again. But moving on to the Israel versus DDP fight, that was one that everybody was so excited for. And it's been a little while, as you mentioned last night, since we had that big fight feel. Israel Adesanya has been out of the game. Obviously, Conor McGregor, some of the biggest stars aren't competing as actively as they used to. And so when you're deprived of an Izzy card, you forget just how important he is until he steps back out there. And I thought Israel Adesanya from the walkout and the fight week, everything looked good. I predicted him to win and was off on that. But I don't want to say this was a bad Izzy. I think this was one of the best forms of Izzy that we saw. It was just a very difficult fight for him. And the awkward style of DDP is what brought out, some wrinkles in Israel's game that wound up exposing him and leaving some openings for DDP to hunt for and then eventually find. And a couple of them that stuck out to me was, so Israel was really good at maintaining range and controlling the distance of the fight for as long as, he wanted to. But DDP was constant with the blitzes, constant with the pressure, and he would transition into pressure on the ground, but he started with pressure on the feet. Those blitz attacks, they look a little bit sloppy, they look a little ugly, but they work.
Yeah.
He's quite effective at putting his hands on the targets when he's doing that. And there's no secret now, DDP hits really hard. I think he's one of the hardest hitters in the middleweight division currently. So all of his opponents realized very quickly that, all right, I need to really be on my P's and Q's for all 15 or 25 minutes of this fight if I don't want to get knocked out by this guy. Unfortunately, nobody's been able to do that yet. But Israel Adesanya had a lot of good moments, and it felt like to me in every single round. And by the way, the judging was all over the place last night. Even one of the judges got dismissed from his duties, and they brought in another one after that.
30-27 for Tai Tuivasa, probably the most egregious scorecard I've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, and we've seen some crazy ones even just this year. So it was crazy to me because I saw Izzy winning the first round, and then I saw DDP winning the second. And then the third round was also very close, but I thought Izzy was up on it. But when the official scorecards came out after the fact, after the finish, DDP was up 2-1, which was interesting for me because I thought Izzy was doing enough to win. And the issue that Izzy ran into was a couple of things. He was willing to engage with DDP, and he was getting the better of the striking exchanges. But when he would finish doing his work, whether it was kicks, whether it was punches, he would admire his work and kind of look at it for a second and stay right in front of his opponent. And DDP was able to blitz right there after that, which didn't give Israel enough time to get out of range. And that's where he ran into trouble. That coupled with the fact that when he did back up, he got really tall, his chin got high, and those overhands that DDP were throwing, it was only a matter of time before one of them was going to land. And he had some good success with that. Izzy didn't make the adjustments to avoid that. And from the spectators' eyes, if we're seeing Izzy get really tall and DDP crashing on him and getting really close with some of those shots, obviously DDP's seeing the same thing we're seeing times 10. He's in there. He knows exactly what Israel's doing wrong and knows how to expose him. So I thought DDP really did adapt his game mid-fight really well. And one other thing that DDP did before I pass it back to you was somehow at some point of every round that took place and was completed, he convinced Israel to get into a firefight with him. And I don't think Israel's afraid to do that, but I don't think it's necessary. I think if he would have been a little bit more calculated and patient on the outside, he could have coasted himself closer to a victory. You know, he was giving DDP those opportunities that I don't think he needed to do. I think DDP was really good at bringing the fight out of Israel Adesanya, but that was compromising Izzy's game. And you could tell that Izzy was doing a lot of things right. The footwork was a thing of beauty. The stance switching was very confusing. Really great kicks, low kicks, high kicks, body kicks, and
body punches. Some of those.
Oh, yeah.
When he was setting up that jab with that, hook to the body, to the liver, I believe that was the side it was on. He really hurt DDP with a few of those.
The liver punches, and he would even double up. So he'd go spleen side, then liver side. And DDP, you pointed out last night, he has a very high guard. So attacking the head with hooks or big kicks is a little bit difficult. So you have to start to attack the body to bring the hands down. And Izzy was doing a good job of that. But the two things that stick out with DDP the most to me are his durability and his power. Yeah, because I don't think people are going to be able to just go out there and one punch knock out DDP. I think you really have to accumulate over about a 4 or 5 round period to get him out of there. Israel just didn't do it. I think Israel still has a very bright future. I think all of the fights he's in from here on out are still going to be meaningful. And I don't think that's the last title shot that we see Izzy in. I think he could very well find himself back in a title opportunity. I'd love to see that fight again. I know it got finished and we won't see that next or anytime soon, but it was a competitive enough fight to where I would like to see it again. And I think Izzy has done so much as a champion and shown us that he can learn from his mistakes and go back and get his win, that it would be an interesting fight. Obviously, 185 has plenty of great characters that we need to see get in there first, and I'd love to see Izzy as a contender, not a number 1 contender, but out there in the ranks with the boys to climb his way back to the top. All in all, DDP proved me wrong on the comments. Now everybody's in the comment section saying that this didn't age very well. And luckily for me, we've got a channel here where we both get to make our predictions. I was well off, but I think you were about as spot on with your prediction as anybody that predicts fights in the combat sports world.
Yeah, and I got grilled for it. I got called an IT guy. As they said, don't take fight advice rather from a guy that looks like an IT specialist.
There you go.
I didn't really take that as an offense.
It's the glasses.
Because, I mean, that's a cool job, I guess, if those guys make some good money. So, but bottom line, you're right. I predicted when we did the video before the fight that Dricus du Plessis was going to win, and he was going to win by submission in the 3rd or 4th round. You can check the record because the receipts are there.
Yeah.
And I also said that he's going to lose the first couple of rounds because Izzy's going to be very difficult, very cerebral, and he's going to move really well and keep the blitzing striker at bay and make it difficult for him to find his entries, which I do think Izzy won, at least 2 of the first 3 rounds.
I do too. Yeah,
I had him winning round 1 and round 3.
Yeah.
And Dricus was the winner for round 2 in my eyes. But a few things that Dricus did extremely well to me, as you mentioned, you already touched on it, were the blitzes. But what he did with those blitzes and those overhands and how he used that to set up his grappling against the cage. Really good body locks. And one thing about DDP, he does keep that high guard. And so it's hard to find, Izzy's very dangerous with head kicks. He can head kick knock you out.
Right.
And I think Dricus, respects his own durability. And so he's like, okay, if I'm going to eat some shots, let it be to the body because I'm not going to get starched with a head kick or with something that I don't see coming. And he even said after the fact, I was in there with a better striker than me. So I had to do what I had to do to make it ugly, to pressure, to get this thing down and ultimately seek that submission, which is exactly how the fight ended. So the blitzing was key for DDP. That awkward blitzing where he's throwing overhands, he's coming in. That, because you said Israel Adesanya, when he's backing up, he's not as elusive sometimes as I'd like for him to be because he is tall and he gets even taller when he's backing up out of an exchange. He'll throw a beautiful 1, 2, 3 and finish it with a body kick or something like that. But then he kind of stands right in front of you, as you said, admiring his work. And then when he does get out of the situation, because DDP reads that the exchange is over for Izzy, and so he's like, okay, now it's my turn to hit the gas. And then when he turns on the green light, Izzy kind of is almost like backtracking, trying to get out of the scenario, and he gets really tall, and that's where some of those overhands landed. So really good read by DDP on being able to utilize that in his game, which is one of the strengths that he has, that blitzing forward type of striking style, and use that against a fighter who's a better striker than him to find striking success in order to get the fight to where you ultimately have the best chance, which is on the ground. Dricus du Plessis, he's got a lot of power, no doubt. You mentioned he's one of the top, pound for pound strikers and powerful as far as power is concerned at 185. I would agree with that, but I would also say he's top 3 or 4 submission aces at 185 as well. So, when you have a guy who's a top level submission guy, generally he's not also a top 5 striker,
right?
And vice versa. Izzy's been one of the best ever at 185 his entire career as far as striking goes. He's not even in the top 30 as far as submission ace goes.
Right.
He doesn't even have a submission victory in the UFC. So we have something really special in DDP. We have a guy that can knock you out. He's got hands of steel. Yes, his striking style is a little bit more awkward than a lot of the top level guys, but it's damn effective. And we have a guy who's got really high level grappling, can pin you down, hold you down, ultimately work his way to the back and submit you. So that's a very dangerous combination. And it's going to be a puzzle that's very difficult to figure out for whoever the challenger is, whether it's Khamzat, because Khamzat, people would think, okay, he's got to go in there and take Dricus down.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. Dricus is really hard to take down. He might even try to take Khamzat down, and he's got incredible submissions of his own. So then if Khamzat's left not able to take him down, how does he handle a fighter like Dricus on the feet who hits like a freight train when he was, dropped by Gilbert Burns? And no disrespect to Dorino Burns, but he was a 155 fighter for most of his career. So I see, and this video is more recapping the fight that happened, but you do have to kind of look forward as to who could be next. And I think Sean Strickland actually is the rightful fighter. Sure. And I do think Sean Strickland does pose a really big threat to DDP, not just because we've already seen that fight and saw how close it is, but because Sean smothers people, man. It's hard to blitz a guy that's walking at you like the Energizer Bunny. You almost have to give somebody that space to start a blitz. And Sean, he's suffocating. He does not give you any space. He's going to come forward and his jab's going to be in your face the entire fight. So really interesting proposition there. And I think that's what's going to be made next. So I just want to give my thoughts real quick before I hand it over to you to talk about the co-main on Izzy. You mentioned you think we'll see Izzy in a title fight again. I am going to have to respectfully disagree. I don't think that Izzy's going to fight for a title again, and I'll tell you why. Because we know what's going to happen at 185 now. Sean Strickland is going to step in. Dana White told us as much. You have Khamzat versus Robert Whittaker. That's going to shake out. All signs point to if Khamzat's the winner of that fight, he's getting the winner of Strickland versus DDP. So you could be talking about a calendar year from now. Izzy already said, I'm not here for a long time anymore. I'm here for a good time. I'm going to leave on my terms the way I want to leave. And I think Izzy's going to take that turn in his career now to fighting the fun fights that he wants to fight that make sense. Maybe you throw Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in there. Obviously, Izzy would have a massive advantage in that fight, but that's a strikers match that some people have been wanting to see for a while. Michael Venom Page. Some things that make sense for Izzy that are fun, that allow him to close out his career the way he wants to close it out. The only caveat being, if Alex Pereira is able to drum up some more drama with Izzy, retain his belt at 205, maybe a fun fight at 205 pops up for Adesanya. He jumps up there and takes that fight, wins it, and then you see that trilogy with him and Alex towards the end of both of their careers. I don't think he's going to fight for the middleweight belt again. No. I really don't.
Okay, well, anything can happen, right? Like Robert Whittaker's been looking really great lately, and if there's new blood at the top of the division, there's a chance that Robert Whittaker could find himself in a title fight again. If Izzy winds up back with the belt, then we're not going to see that fight take place again. So it's one of those things where everything will change quickly, and we don't know for sure. But
Bo Nickel too, he's coming up, so they're going to fast track him.
He's coming in hot, and I think Israel Adesanya showed us last night that his skills are still absolutely that of one of the best strikers in the game. The one thing that stuck out to me that's a difference between him and Sean Strickland is the pressure that DDP was able to use on Israel was the reason Israel started to get tired. And we saw both of these guys fade, actually. Their gas tanks were starting to weather a bit.
Yeah.
Sean Strickland seems to have an endless cardio gas tank. He doesn't really get that tired, and the pressure that he puts on you does sort of leave you moving backwards, which is not what DDP wants to do. No fighter is as good moving backward as they are good moving forwards, and also there's not as much power on their punches and their attacks when they're moving backwards. So styles definitely make matchups. We'll touch more on that topic when we talk about Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. But yeah, all in all, I think Israel Adesanya proved to us last night that he's still one of the best in the world. Even though he didn't get his hand raised, I thought he did a lot of things really well. And, Israel's not going to be here all that much longer, and we're going to miss him when he's gone. So for me, I just love Israel. I think he's a fun fighter to watch. I think he brought a lot of new eyes to the sport. He's done so much for the sport internationally that he needs to get his due. I don't think people need to see that performance last night and see that he got second place to the world champion and think that he's some washed up, can't compete anymore
Not even
fighter.
close.
He's very good. And like I said, the judges had it different than me, but I certainly had him up 2-1 when they went into the fourth. And I thought he looked good. The gas was the biggest issue, and that was what was slowing him down on his exits. And obviously DDP is one of those guys where, yes, he's going to run out of gas, but he'll conserve just enough and burst at the right times of the rounds to show you just like a flooring pace.
Yeah.
And once he does that, you'll get some oohs and ahs from the crowd. You might wind up dropping somebody. I remember at one point of the fight, Israel tripped over DDP's foot, but when it's all happening in real time, you can't tell if that was a drop or if it was a trip. You don't really know. So DDP was gaining a lot of momentum and doing things really well. But I have to preface this one more time. I really do think that DDP, his ability to adjust on the fly and find corrections in his game and find holes in Israel's game was the reason he won that fight. Because if it would have continued at the pace and at the style that it was going, Israel's takedown defense was only getting better as the fight went along. And DDP looked like he was getting more tired. But obviously, styles make matchups. He was able to force the fight and take control. And now he's leading the dance against Israel and doing what he wants to do. And then, of course, the groundwork, there was a clear advantage. Izzy looked good in his submission defenses at first. And Izzy said this was the first guy to ever submit me. So you have to understand that that's something pretty special under DDP's, it's a feather in his cap. Nobody's ever submitted this guy. Now I get him out of there. It was a great choke. There was no way out of it for Izzy. He didn't fight all that long, but he's a champion. He knows when somebody was the better man that night, and he's willing to take second place. But yeah, I love that there was a good rapport between the two. They were able to squash their beef and squash their differences. There's a lot of respect, and now they see all three of the original African kings see DDP now as the fourth African king, and he also sees them as legit African champions. So all in all, it was a good night of fights. I think, or morning of fights for them over in Perth. But all in all, I was really impressed with both of the guys. I think DDP is going to be very hard to beat. Styles make matchups, so Sean Strickland's going to be a difficult one for him, but he's got the experience of 25 minutes with him, so I think it's going to be an interesting fight. Hopefully that happens in the later part of this year, because I'd really like to see 185 keep moving at the pace it's moving.
Yeah, and just to touch one more time on the Adesanya not fighting for a belt again, it's not because I don't think he's still at the top of the top. I think he's absolutely one of the best middleweights on the planet. He's just now 0-2 in his last two fights.
Yeah.
He's got to win a fight. You can't lose 3 fights in a row and get a title shot. So he's got to beat somebody.
Right.
Who's that somebody going to be? It's not going to be anybody pleasant if we know how the UFC operates.
Right.
35 years old, 0-2, massive name with other people coming up that are trying to build their names. It's going to be a hard fight that's a tough stylistic matchup, which is why I think Izzy may just not even entertain it. He's like, look, I'm not your gatekeeper. I'm going to fight this person. I'm going to fight that person. And he's a big enough star to do it.
Right. And just one last thing on that before we move into the co-main event. I think Israel, the energy in that arena last night was kind of the reason I was indicating towards, I think Izzy's going to win. You see Dan Hooker go out there and just fight of the night. Obviously a fight that can put him in the BMF contention. He was already a candidate for that, but that fight last night, he has the Australian version of the Charles Du Bronx Oliveira makeover where he's all tatted up, blonde hair, looks cool now, and he came out just like with this psychotic mentality, and it was a kill or be killed type of thing. And then Kai Kara France going out there doing what he does. I was like, man, everything's lining up for Israel. But he just, the better man got his hand raised that night. And I think Izzy will be back. I don't think we need to wait for him and see what he does by the end of this year. I don't think we see Izzy again this year. I think he's going to come when he comes. And one other thing about Israel Adesanya is, I don't know if it was last night or a couple of fights ago, but at some point, and it draws perfectly to what you were saying about his future fights in the UFC and how he can just have some fun at this point. I think that Israel Adesanya is at a point now where winning and losing doesn't really define him, like Conor McGregor. If he loses, yes, it's not good for him as far as going towards a title, but Israel Adesanya will be nothing less than a feature bout in his UFC career. I don't see him falling onto the prelims or falling off of a pay-per-view main event.
He's not going to allow himself to become a BJ Penn or a
No.
Tony Ferguson. Izzy's a smart guy.
Right.
When it's time to call it a day, Izzy will call it a day.
Right. But I think you're right. He should have fun in these fights that he's got left. And if it's not for a title, at least it'll be a major thing that continues to bring more and more eyes. And we'll continue to get that big fight feel with Izzy, regardless of how many fights he has and regardless of his placement on the card.
For sure. Now moving into